Good morning, everybody. We're going to give it just a minute or two for the rest of the folks who are signed up to join us, and then we'll get underway in just a moment. All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Peter Rothstein, president of NECEC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 2021 legislative roundup. This is a very popular and valuable annual event that we do, taking stock of the legislative progress and opportunities across the Northeast, the NECEC region. We're going to bring everyone into, we'll have a lot of our partners involved in this today. It's going to be an opportunity to hear about legislation that's been helping to advance the clean economy and the clean energy industry across all of our 7 states. And it cuts across updates on targets, on planning and roadmaps, distributed energy resources, solar and storage and other resources that fit in that category. Efforts going on around grid scale generation, especially in the offshore wind area, and many other areas, clean transportation, decarbonization of buildings, grid modernization, evolution of markets. Boy, there's a lot. Environmental justice benefits, the interconnection challenges that are continue to be a major issue for the clean energy industry and the partnering approaches with utilities to resolve those. All of these issues are front and center. So we'll be talking about them with our panelists and our team today. Have the next slide, please. To kick us off here, I want to take a moment first to thank our sponsoring host, Foley Hoag. Foley Hoag's been a sponsor of NECEC for many years and are on board supporting this event, but also contributing to some of the content today. And as sponsor, I'd like to give Noah Shaw, a partner at Foley Hoag, a moment on the floor. So Noah, you turn your microphone on, and the floor is yours.
Here I am, Peter. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Foley Hoag, and I know I speak for the entire firm. When I express the value that this organization has played to the firm and to all of the firm's clients around the Northeast and the energy sector for a very long time. So as a relative newbie here at Foley Hoag, it's great to be in the fold and to have a chance to talk to you all. I joined Foley Hoag earlier this year. Prior to that, I was general counsel at the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority and also worked at a regional law firm in New York, and also had a stint at the Department of Energy down in Washington, D.C. in the Obama administration. And so, my practice and I are focused really on all the same issues that Foley has been involved with so deeply in especially the New England market, and we're really now spreading our wings into New York, which I like to remind people is the 11th biggest economy in the world. So there's plenty going on over here on the other side of the Berkshires, as many of you know. It makes so much sense for Foley to be a partner, a strong partner with NECEC and with Peter and Jeremy and everybody else on the staff who have been doing this work for such a long time, because the organization brings so much value to our clients, frankly, and that value is I think going to be on display here today as we run through the details of the various legislative developments over the course of the last year and what we are all looking forward to, which is maybe even more interesting in our respective states and markets in the coming years. This level of granularity and sort of overview is something that just is, I know I have found in the preparation of this and reviewing everybody else's presentations incredibly educational and helpful, and I'm sure you all will too. So With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Peter, and we can get started with the substance of the program.
Thanks, Noah. Great to have Foley's involvement, and great to have you involved with our event today, but also with NECEC. Okay. Because I want to give a special thanks to our state partners who play a big role in our policy work on an ongoing basis. But I think on the next slide, our state partner logos are listed. Focus Government Affairs, who's our partner in Connecticut. Renewable Energy Vermont, who's our partner obviously in Vermont. E2 Tech, the Environmental and Energy Technology Council of Maine, and Clean Energy New Hampshire. All of these partners are work with us every week, and especially in this legislative roundup event, where they bring their expertise of being on the ground in the various states to our updates and to our discussions today. So if I can have the next page, please. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy McDermott, NECEC's Vice President of Policy and Government Affairs, who's going to moderate this next portion of the roundup, where you're going to hear from each of our state leads, as well as from the NECEC team. And Jeremy, the floor is yours.
Terrific. Thank you, Peter. And I wanted to thank everybody for tuning in this morning and joining us for the annual legislative roundup. I echo the sentiments of Noah and Peter in that we have a great team of partners in Foley and our regional crew, and really looking forward to jumping into it and having a quick discussion about sort of the good and the bad and the unfinished around the region in legislatures in 2021. And then we're gonna have a quick and sort of meaningful discussion about energy storage, where we've seen a lot of activity across the region, particularly a couple of high priority bills that were enacted this session. And that's going to be led by our star intern and valuable NECEC teammate, Ella Park. So just a quick reminder for folks that if you have a question, please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. We will endeavor to answer all questions either in the Q&A chat box or in real time. You know, it's a great sort of moment to take stock of what's happening and what hasn't happened in each of our states. And what I'd like to do is to first introduce Mike Martone. Mike's a partner at Focus Government Affairs and has been a longstanding NECEC teammate and really an invaluable resource in making sure that Connecticut continues to drive towards a clean energy transition. Mike, please join us and I will step aside.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jeremy, and welcome everyone. Pleasure to be with you today. Unfortunately, we can't be doing this in person. Hopefully, we'll get there. We'll get there next year. But let me start with the big one in Connecticut, and that is Public Act 2153, an act concerning energy storage. And what this does, it set a goal of 1,000 megawatts by 2030, with interim goals of 300 megawatts by 2024 and 650 megawatts by 2027. And as Jeremy mentioned, we're going to get into this in greater detail later in the program. So I'll just add now that there's an environmental justice component that will provide a yet to be determined project incentive for projects that are done in environmental justice communities. Next, we have Public Act 2143, an act concerning a just transition to climate protective energy production and community investment. This bill came out of the Labor Committee, and it requires developers of projects 2 megawatts or more to pay at least the prevailing wage, and projects greater than 5 megawatts to pay the prevailing wage, but also establish a workforce development program so workers can grow beyond their existing positions. It also requires them to take all reasonable actions to enter into a community benefit agreement. It doesn't apply to offshore wind projects, nor does it apply to competitive solicitations that may be conducted at the end of this year. And while this is great news for labor, I think it's clearly going to increase the cost of larger renewable projects in Connecticut. Public Act 21-162 is great news for the fuel cell industry for our good friend Dave Giordano at Doosan and others. It requires the EDCs to acquire 30 megawatts of fuel cell power, and it gives preference to projects that use equipment manufactured in Connecticut or projects that are located on landfills or brownfields. Next slide, please. Public Act 21-118 increases the Class 3 procurement requirement from 4 to 5% through the year 2024. And this is the RPS requirement for EDCs and third-party electric suppliers. Public Act 21-180 essentially clarifies and expands an existing law regarding property tax for behind-the-meter solar projects. It was a law enacted in 2013 that exempted behind-the-meter projects, but it hasn't been interpreted properly by local tax collectors. So this bill covers all non-residential installations, including leased projects. Clarifies as long as the production doesn't exceed the load, there is no property tax assessed. And finally, Public Act 21-48 requires DEEP to establish an energy efficiency retrofit grant program using federal funds. And the grants will go towards energy efficiency upgrades to affordable housing, which includes housing authorities and some multifamily dwellings. Energy efficiency is really expanded in Connecticut to include rooftop solar, EV charging infrastructures, heat pumps, ventilation and mitigation of health and safety concerns. And again, this is primarily geared towards folks in environmental justice communities and low-income folks. Our good friend Steve Powell tells me that this may become a national model once it's implemented in Connecticut. So next slide. So I want to talk next about what failed and then what we may look ahead to in Connecticut. So what failed, and despite very hard lobbying on the part of many in the industry and many people that I'm sure are on the Zoom call today, the virtual net metering cap was not increased in Connecticut this year. Likewise with TCI, the Acadia Center and others did a great job in lobbying very hard to get TCI implemented in Connecticut. Governor supported it. Many in the legislature, however, saw this as a regressive tax on low-income drivers. However, there's an upcoming special session in September that is scheduled to appropriate about $300 million in federal funds. There's a strong push to make TCI part of this call as well. And one of the big proponents of this is Environment Committee co-chair Joe Gresko. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with TCI in the session. And the other thing that didn't pass was the proposed decoupling of DEEP and PURA. It passed the Senate on the consent calendar, but it was never taken up in the House. So what's next for Connecticut? I mean, as many of you I think know, the tariff program will be replacing LREC, ZREC, and virtual net metering effective January of 22. And energy storage will certainly come to the forefront of renewable energy policy as we move forward. So I'm going to turn it over now to Sean to speak on the tariff docket. The docket, I should say.
Hey, Mike. Happy to do so, and I think we can dig more into the dockets on the storage part of the presentation. But a couple of, well, it was 2 years ago, and then changes to the legislation that required a replacement programs for LREC, ZREC, and net metering. And so we and a number of you all participated in that process that establishes beginning in February of next year a 50 megawatt zero emission program and a 10 megawatt low emission program that has biannual auctions and two tariff structures to choose from, including buy all, sell all, and then a monthly netting option with RECs as well. And then the energy storage one, I think we can keep that for the energy storage part of the presentation or the panel. But that was another one that we spent a significant amount of time on over the past year or so. Thank you.
So we're gonna flow right back to Sean Burke, who is a frequent visitor to your email inboxes and NECEC's policy associate, who's going to take us through Rhode Island, and then we'll keep going. Sean.
Great, thanks, Jeremy, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to keep rolling here and into Rhode Island, and I probably should have had another slide, but I think I want to set the stage before talking about specific bills. And really, with COVID last year shutting down the legislative session, there was a lot of pent up energy for energy bills this session. And we had been working with other advocates and the administration to really build support for some of the major bills for this session. And that was thrown a bit of a curveball when on January 7th, Governor Raimondo was nominated for Secretary of Commerce. And the administration in the changeover kind of stepped back, and a lot of the effort fell to the advocates with less understanding where the administration would stand when Governor McKee came in and was confirmed on 2 months later on March 2nd. And in that time, there was a groundswell of support for the 2021 Act on Climate, which was the first major bill passed in the regular session this year on April 6th. And it's really going to set the framework for future decisions on climate and energy related issues. I think importantly requires for the first time in Rhode Island, before it was a goal and now it's a mandate, emissions reductions, and strengthens that mandate to net zero by 2050, and also requires for the first time environmental justice considerations in the planning for future climate decisions as well. Next slide, please. I don't know if it's just my screen, but I can start rolling into the next slides.
Go ahead. I'm having a moment with the slide real quick, but I'll get there.
No problem. Let me just pull it up on my screen too. Yeah, so then I wanted to talk about a few key bills that did pass this session. Starting on the energy efficiency side, where there were a few bills that have been filed a number of times over the past few years that did finally make it across the finish line this session. The first is the updated appliance efficiency standards bills, which do exactly what I just said and have been filed around the region for a number of years, and finally across the finish line in Rhode Island this year. And then there's the least cost procurement extension, which the least cost procurement statute authorizes the energy efficiency programs in Rhode Island, and was set to sunset in 2023. And there was a back and forth with the administration proposing some changes to the bill that that we were not comfortable with and that other advocates were not comfortable with. And ultimately, the bill passed as a pretty much a simple extension of the current authorization through 2028. There is also a transportation-related bill that requires the state to put forth a statewide EV infrastructure plan by 2022. And then an interconnection bill that would make a number of changes to the challenging interconnection process in Rhode Island, and that we've seen in other states as well, and would, among other things, implement an ombudsperson and also change the allocation of transmission costs for interconnection, and that was ultimately vetoed by the governor. Next slide, please. And I wanted to, well, we've had conversations with legislators and expect that there will be a fall session to take up some of the unfinished business from the regular session this year. It's not official yet, so anything could happen, but we do expect that the legislature will reconvene sometime this fall. And these are some of the potential bills that we hope might be taken up during that session, starting with one of the bills that we've pushed hardest on, which is the 100% renewable energy standard by 2030, which passed the Senate, but did not pass the House. And we co-authored an op-ed with one of our members to put some heat on to get this across the finish line this year. We've also put a lot of work into the community remote net metering expansion with a number of you all. And for context, this would expand the currently fully subscribed community remote net metering program. And it passed the House with some changes to the legislation. But then in the Senate, there's been a back and forth with some changes proposed by some of the agencies that would have significantly reduced the compensation for these projects and that we could not support. So we've been working to try and find a compromise bill that could expand the program and ensure successful community solar development in the state of Rhode Island. And then the Transportation and Climate Initiative also kind of got caught up in the administration transfer, with Governor Raimondo being one of the first signatories to the Memorandum of Understanding, and Governor McKee not having a position, understandably, when he took office. But through a lot of effort from a lot of folks, he has come around to support TCI, and it passed the Senate, and we're hopeful it will pass the House this fall. And then there's a solar taxation bill to clarify solar tax policy that may arise, and an interconnection bill, the one that I just talked about, that was vetoed by the governor, and that we intend to convene with our members that have been pushing this to understand whether a veto override is possible, and whether to push for that. And then last slide. And then what's next for Rhode Island? Rhode Island is significantly behind every other state on energy storage legislatively, and is something that we hope that will gain some traction next session, especially with the successes that we'll hear about in the next part of the program. In order to meet our climate goals, we'll need expanded programs like community remote net metering and renewable energy growth. And then lastly, building sector decarbonization. There's a number of barriers to truly decarbonizing that sector that need to be removed in order for us to ensure that we hit those climate goals in the new Act on Climate. I will stop there and turn it back to Jeremy. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sean. I mean, it was a very productive session in Rhode Island this year, and I think that there's much more to do. And the 100% renewable electricity concept, I think, is something that is live and hopefully gets taken up this fall. You'll notice, folks, that there's been a little bit of a Zoom glitch. It is Zoom wide and not on any of our sort of connections, and so please bear with us as there are potentials for freezing up and a little bit slow on the slides. But we will forge ahead and push through. And now I want to turn it to the Dean of the NECEC policy team, Mr. Dan Bosley, who can talk to us about what's happening in Massachusetts. And unlike oftentimes in the first year of a 2-year session where there's not a ton to report, there is a fair amount of activity happening already in the legislature in Massachusetts. So Dan B., take it away.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'm sorry about these Zoom glitches, but if somebody asks me a question that I cannot answer, I'll just go like that. And so it's actually pretty good. Before I get into the bill that was passed, because in Massachusetts, as opposed to some states, they will tend to put a lot of bills into one omnibus bill, and that happened again this year. But I want to remind people that it's not just the bills, that it's other things that NECEC does. And so in the first slide, I'm not going to read these things, but we co-chair the ACES Coalition. That's the Alliance for Clean Energy Solutions. There's 24 members in environmental groups, in energy groups, and also in some business groups that work together so that we can push one agenda. And I think that's very important. It's also important to understand that, in talking to legislators, we need to get up there, and we've done that virtually for the last few years. This year, along with the Alliance for Business Leadership, we met with 19 members of the legislature, most of the members of the Energy Committee, but also with the two chairs of TUE, Telecommunications, Utility, and Energy, as well as Natural Resources, and as well as the Ways and Means Committees. So it's very important that we continue to do that, to continue to nudge them. If they're going to do one big bill, we want to make sure that we're representing what our members want for those priorities in those bills. Could I have the next slide, please? So the 2021 agenda for the legislature, they filed, there's 516 bills that we're following. I'd like to mention them all right now. No, but we have 516 bills. So we watch them in all the different committees. They don't necessarily go just into the TUE committee. We've held meetings with both chairs of TUE and Environment as they were setting their agendas. We testified on community empowerment in the municipal hearing in TUE and testified on the RPS proposed changes. And since I did this slide, we've also testified on offshore wind and storage and on the Mass Clean Energy Center funding in one committee hearing. In another committee hearing, testified on interconnection and also on several bills on electric vehicles and grid modernization, and also sent testimony into the Municipal and Regional Government Committee that had a bill that would allow electronic submission of permitting in Massachusetts, but would also streamline the process, which a lot of other states are going through. And then we monitored the RPS change to the committee, the second committee hearing, and labor and workforce development on energy-related job training, as well as the Senate Committee on Climate Change. We monitored that hearing too on their testimony. Can I have the next slide, please? So as I said, in Massachusetts, we tend to put everything into one bill. And I'm not going to go through everything on this bill. There's an awful lot of good things, an awful lot for us to like. The Next Generation Roadmap actually codifies our greenhouse gas limits at net zero by 2050. And instead of every 10-year goal, it has a 5-year goal. It sets specific pathways, and it sets it in 6 sublimits of electric power, transportation, C&I heating and cooling, residential heating and cooling, industrial processes that are not covered under their heating, and also natural gas distribution and services. It allows DPU to consider climate change as one of the factors as they go forward in making decisions within the DPU. And it promotes natural and working lands as we look at decarbonization and carbon sequestration through natural and working lands. Can I have the next slide, please? And again, this is all in the bill. It writes in environmental justice. It raises offshore wind authorization. It mandates the promulgation in municipalities to start thinking about net zero stretch energy codes. And it sets reduction goals for mass save. They've got to come up with a plan. The utilities have to come up with a plan and actually show how they're reducing our reliance on fossil fuels. So there's a lot of good things in this, and these slides will be available, so I'm not going to go through everything on these slides. Can I have the next slide, please? And so that's what we've done. That one bill that passed in February, and the bill actually passed last year. The governor had problems with it. Ultimately, it didn't become law. So they came back in. To the legislature's credit, they put it as their #1 priority this year. It passed in February, but things that we need to do, and there are things that we need to change or work on within the bill that was passed. Energy solar tax policy still needs a lot of work on it. So we're going to work on that, and you can see that these are the things that lie ahead as our priorities. Obviously, we need to do something on interconnection. The Mass CEC needs to be refunded, and then work on transportation and heating, which are just as important as electric power. Large-scale storage procurement. Every state is working on storage these days. Empowering communities to procure renewables and strengthen energy efficiency programs. And that I will pass back to, I look forward to your questions or your chat, and I will pass this back to Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. And sort of the legislative session this time in Massachusetts began with an unusual bang, but no shortage of work left to do. And so we're going to continue to keep pushing away. And now it's my privilege to introduce a relative newcomer to our fold, but a stranger to few of you. Sam Evans-Brown recently joined Clean Energy New Hampshire as its new executive director after having been a successful and prominent journalist in the great state of New Hampshire. And he has taken the reins ably, and excited to welcome him to the stage right now. Sam.
Hi, everybody. I haven't been experiencing trouble with my laptop camera, and I don't think I'm going to be able to show you my face because
you're a radio guy anyway, right?
Exactly. This is my safe space. Is just you hearing my voice, but not seeing my face. So apologies on that front, but that's okay. We've got slides to divert your attention. So just to lay out the legislative landscape for you all. This year was the first year that we had a legislature that was controlled by the Republican Party, as well as a Republican in the corner office, Governor Sununu. And so we were largely playing defense, but also it was an interesting year because I'd say the composition of the general court was a bit more conservative than even the governor was comfortable with. And so we were able to sort of eke a couple wins out and in collaboration with the governor's office, as well as a number of our allies, particularly in the Senate, which tends to be, for those of you who aren't familiar, not only does New Hampshire have the largest legislature in the country, but it also has the largest disparity between the sizes of the two chambers. So the Senate has 24 members and the House has 400. So the Senate really does act as a cooling saucer to a lot of the bills that are proposed. And the other aspect of the New Hampshire legislature is that every bill, anyone can propose a bill if they would like to, and every bill gets a hearing. And so that's a dynamic where you tend to see a lot of the same bills coming back year after year after year. And that was certainly the case this year, where we were looking at a lot of the proposals to completely eliminate the renewable portfolio standard or roll back the renewable portfolio standard. Similarly, bills that would sort of neuter our energy efficiency programs. But despite all the defense that we were playing, we were able to as I said, eke out a couple of wins, particularly in the area of net metering, which we'll talk about in a moment. But also there was an omnibus bill which has got some exciting provisions in it. So next slide, please. So HB 315, for those who are keeping track at home, started as a bill that was looking to limit the state's community power program. And community power is our municipal aggregation program that was passed a couple of years ago. It's very exciting. It's seeing a lot of interest at the local level from the towns that have got a bit more ambition in terms of rolling out clean energy and saving money on the bills of their citizens. And so this HB 315 started out as a substantial rollback of community power, but we were able to work again with our allies and nip that language in the bud, and also included in it, by the time it was passed, an expansion of net metering from the 1 megawatt cap that had existed, for, although that is limited exclusively to municipalities. It's a major win for us. It's something we've been working on for years. And we're very excited that a lot of our towns will be able to start to build up some of these larger projects and share between the meters of their municipal facilities. So that was one major win. The second was SB 91, which the two were sort of passed as a pair as part of this compromise. SB 91 includes the sort of authorization for the Public Utilities Commission to head out and create some new rules regarding energy storage. There had been some problems with the way the rules had been written in the past that were limiting the possibilities that folks had to install storage. And so now the PUC will open a proceeding in which they're going to essentially say, how can we limit barriers to installation of storage in residences, and how can we ensure that we're capturing all of the potential savings that should be accruing to the state for the characteristics of that storage, in particular looking to limit the peaks and flatten out the curve, all the things that folks have recognized storage as being really valuable for. And so we will be actively engaging with the creation of those rules, trying to ensure that they're as seamless as possible, and that we're able to ramp up our residential storage installations here in state as a result of them. And that omnibus bill included a number of other sections. There was a small tweak to small hydro and how it's considered for net metering. There was a provision that suggests that the PUC needs to reinvestigate net metering tariffs and revisit. We had a large how should I say it? A haircut to net metering that happened a couple of years ago. And essentially this bill says, let's dig back into our net metering tariffs and see if they're just and reasonable, see if there's more data that has been collected since then. And so that will, again, be an area that we're going to be actively engaging in over at the PUC. And the last one here, the establishment of limited electrical energy producers, is something we're actually pretty excited for. It's a study, so it's early days yet, but essentially this would be looking into the degree to which in-state generation could be selling directly to in-state load, and if the creation of a sort of new mechanism to do that might be a way of encouraging the construction of more in-state generation. If anyone's interested in that, you can perhaps contact me offline. We can talk more about it. It's very early days, but it's something that I think we're all pretty excited about. So next slide, please. A couple of other bills passed that are worthy of note. So rec sweeping. I don't know if this is an issue in other states, but it has been an issue here in New Hampshire. It's a long story. It's sort of illustrative of how things happen here in New Hampshire. Essentially, when the RPS was created, the PUC created rules for what it would take to qualify your recs and sell them into the market. And the rules that they created were fairly prohibitive, just from like a nuts and bolts standpoint. If you wanted to put solar on your roof and sell your recs, there was a lot you needed to do. You needed, an extra utility grade meter that was just measuring your output, so that they could determine how many recs you've created. And and essentially it meant that a lot of folks did not sign up to sell RECs. And then the utilities said, hey, there are all these people who are not selling their RECs. We should be able to just claim those. And so they've been sweeping up these RECs for free. We have not been able to eliminate REC sweeping, but we have lowered the capacity factor that they're using to calculate how many RECs they get to sweep. The other thing to say is we did not join TCI, and there was a bill that would have been essentially a gag order that would have prevented staff from even talking about joining TCI. That is HB 373. That bill was essentially, I would say, neutered. It was changed so that instead of being a gag order, it just said that if the state were to join a program like TCI, it would have to be approved by governor and council, which we think is largely fine. So next slide. So there's a lot that was retained. I would argue that much of this will be sort of continuing to play defense the way that we had to play defense during the past session. The big one to watch is changes to energy efficiency. That's HB 549. Essentially, our state EERS, the Energy Efficiency Resource Standard, was created at the Public Utilities Commission and under the authority of the PUC to capture all cost-effective energy efficiency. It was never approved by the legislature, and that has annoyed a lot of legislators. And they are seeking to get it under legislative control. Largely, we believe, so that they can reduce the system's benefits charge. So that will likely be a priority as a retained bill in the fall session. And I would say that we can expect a lot of these same bills to come back once again in the next session as well. But we're also hopeful that we'll see an offshore wind procurement, and we may be able to eke out a couple more wins with our allies in the next session as well. The last thing to say is we did in fact create a Department of Energy this past session. That is something that Clean Energy New Hampshire has supported. In theory, the creation of that Department of Energy has not gone smoothly and has essentially resulted in paralysis at the Public Utilities Commission because all of the PUC staff was moved over to that Department of Energy, and they've had to rehire everyone who's working there. So essentially, it's been a summer off at the PUC, and not much progress on a lot of our priorities there, which has been frustrating. And with that, I'll pass it on to the next.
Thanks, Sam. I inadvertently went out of order, and please forgive me, Marty Groman. Marty is the executive director of E2 Tech and a guru for all things policy and political in the great state of Maine. Let's turn over to Marty now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Sam, for that great review, in New Hampshire as well. A lot in common with Maine as far as things that were taken on, although of course, all three chambers and the governorship in Maine here is Democratic. So what I want to do is just give a little bit of, I guess, 3 slides. One is kind of an overlay of the themes in the session. I'll get into a few specifics and then look at what is ahead. And of course, welcome questions and follow up either at marty@e2tech.org or in the Q&A panel. So, we started out like many in an expanded civic center setting with everyone spaced 6 or even 12 feet apart. And then the Senate met within the House chamber. And we were, by the end of the session, able to get back into our normal setting. And so it had this effect within the session of really, frankly, starting in blue and then a rocket at the end. We did hold great What's Ahead sessions that had great attendance, and it was a nice chance for, I think, effectively was almost the first committee meetings for our energy, utilities, and technology committees, as well as our ENR committees. And then from there, I think a big theme that really highlighted and within the Energy Committee kind of held on was that we have this debate of Pine Tree Power advanced by the Energy Committee Chair, Seth Berry. And that bill came out It was printed, I think, on May 17th, was heard on May 20th, and voted on May 27th or something like that. So as the session progressed, it really, you knew it was coming, and then it showed up and dominated a lot of the session. But there was this effect that it allowed other things to sort of advance under the radar, and some would argue let a lot of stuff get done that might not otherwise have happened, including really quite a lot. A microgrid bill that has been advanced for, as by my count, I don't know, 5 or 6 sessions in a row, finally passed this time. And Green Bank, CPACE, rate studies on time of use and electric vehicle demand charges, and also transferability of residential unused NEB credits, all passed. So that would be a good chance for me to look at the next slide. I've received some flack on this slide, so I'll let you observe it here for a minute. I showed this to my E2Tech board, and they said, you're being too optimistic about the puzzle pieces. Use this thematically as to what's sort of going on, and starting with the PUC in the lower left and then just going clockwise. So the PUC charter in Maine has been updated, and I feel like that's a very significant development, asking the PUC to consider climate change in their activities and procurements. I put NEB 2.0 there. Some have said to me, that's ambitious. Our net energy billing policy has received the haircut as well. Legislative intent is for 2 megawatt and below projects to continue as before. And then there is an open PUC docket to basically certify that you qualify, your projects qualify under the new requirements for the 5 megawatt and below. LD 528, a storage bill passed with that I think is going to do a lot of good. And then I show the puzzle piece of interconnection, obviously being a big problem and concern. Maybe that will fall into place. We're seeing a lot of emphasis by the governor on breaking the logjam there. But like a lot of states, that continues to be a big delay. There was just an article in the looking at Penobscot County and that region, which is just a small part of Maine, where there's 78 projects in the queue and only one of them has actually received everything needed for interconnection. So I know that's a major point of frustration. The transmission line projects in Maine continue to be controversial, but one that frankly didn't appear to be controversial would be one sort of up the right side of the map, as opposed to the controversial one was sort of on the left side of the map, to bring transmission up to northern Maine to sort of break the logjam of wind power that's up there. So I thought that was really interesting. I'll highlight EV adoption and say that E2Tech is working on Maine's clean transportation roadmap. If you work in that area, I would love to hear from you. And finally, on this slide in the upper right, former Governor Paul LePage has announced that he'll challenge Governor Janet Mills in the 2022 election. Governor LePage was known as an opponent to clean energy adoption goals. I think, you know, there's a view there that there's a window here for clean energy policy, although prognosticators think that Governor Mills is in a very good position for re-election. But that will certainly be highlighting the upcoming short session in the Maine legislature. And Kate, if you want to bump to my final slide. We do it in Maine, a citizen legislature. So the second session, which is coming up, is the quote unquote short session. So the legislature will convene in January of 2022 and ideally generally get out the door by March or early April. that allows everybody to run for re-election and get involved with primaries if they have a primary and so forth. So people get pretty motivated to get out the door towards the end of that session. There are a lot of significant carryovers in the Energy Committee. There's actually 18 bills. I'd be happy to share that list, or I know that Sean has it. I highlight a couple of things on this slide. Lots of funding to Dan Burgess in the Governor's Energy Office. Dan is doing a great job there. I think most people think that his team has been under-resourced, so that's going to do a lot to address that concern. And I picked 4 bills that and I could have picked others, including the committee has carried one over that might be an omnibus to deal with utility issues that could go a lot of different directions. And there are just numerous PUC report backs. I'm still tallying how many there are, but there's more than 10. And so legislators will have a lot to chew on coming from stakeholder groups on NEB, time of use rates, storage rates, and just hopefully the committee will be able to focus without the overlay of Pine Tree Power in this short session and chew into some of these issues and get work done that needs to be done. So I will wrap it up by plugging 2 things that E2 Tech is doing. We're having a fun mixer 2 weeks from today at Broad Turn Farm in Scarborough. Come out and see your colleagues and get a great farm tour. And as I mentioned, we're working on the clean transportation roadmap here in Maine. I know that I'd love to hear, and the team would love to hear feedback at marty@e2tech.org. And thank you to Jeremy, Peter, and the whole NECEC team.
Thank you so much, Marty. And after the sort of booming session from 2019, a lot of activity sort of making sure that the promise of those big bills gets implemented correctly, and a lot of common themes throughout the region. I want to now turn back to Dan Bosley, who's pinch hitting for the great state of Vermont. Dan, take us away.
Thank you very much. Before I do that, I just want to say that, you know, Vermont's the second least populated state in the United States. It's 623,000 people. So sometimes that makes it easier and sometimes it doesn't. They have a citizenship that participates very deeply. And a lot of that participation is driven by Renewable Energy Vermont, our partner up there. And so the slides today and a lot of the things that they've done, we owe a big thanks to Olivia Campbell Anderson, who was the executive director and stepped down recently. They're in a search for a new executive director, which is why I'm pinch hitting. But they're extremely active up there, and there's a lot of forward thinking and planning that's gone on in Vermont. I'd like to mention four issues, and the first is 431, House 431, which is it's not really an omnibus bill. It was a miscellaneous bill. They took several different miscellaneous pieces, but it really focuses in on storage. And I know we're going to talk about storage, but it redefines energy storage. Anything over 100 kilowatts needs a CPG, which is their certificate. It's called their Certificate of Public Good. And then it defines energy storage aggregation. It doesn't have to all be in one place. It establishes a statewide tax formula. I know that we'd like to see this in every state, but they have a statewide tax formula of 50 cents per kilowatt hour for the plant rating, for the state tax, and then 25 cents for the municipal tax. So you know going in what you're going to be paying for this. And then they're going to propose interconnection rules that incorporate energy storage. But again, this is something that every state is looking at, doing more on interconnection. They've got a definitive timeline, and they're working very hard on that. Next slide, please. I wanted to just mention, well, this goes on about the statewide tax formula and energy storage, by the way, under 600 kWh is exempt from any state or municipal property tax. They also did something that I think is very important, is that they defined the underlying property, the real estate, the real property cannot change because you've altered it by putting in energy storage or solar. So I think that's extremely important. Next slide, please. The second thing that I wanted to mention is renewable heating. Just very quickly, there's $5 million left in the Clean Energy Development Fund. They want to submit a plan to use that to the legislature at the beginning of the next session. But they've already taken steps to do a renewable and efficiency heating system grant program for public schools. You can get up to 50% back for whatever you do to upgrade your system or to change your system in schools in Vermont. And then they also are thinking about geothermal by creating a license for well drillers. It's important to a very small portion, but it should be something that's very important to Vermont as we go forward. Next slide, please. Transportation, this slide is almost too small to see everything they've done in transportation. They're doing electric vehicle charging rates that everyone is talking about. They actually have done this. They've established state goals of level 3 charging stations within 5 miles of every exit on federal highways and within 50 miles along state highways. So in Vermont, you'll never be beyond 50 miles from your closest charging station. They put $1 million into multi-housing charging stations for affordable housing. The 20 EVs doesn't sound like a lot for a state fleet, but this is a state with 623,000 residents. That's a lot of vehicles in their state fleet. As they work towards a fully electric public transit fleet. One of the things that I might add that they didn't do, but we need to watch because we have the same problem in Western so that they can roll all of this stuff out. Next slide, please. And then finally, the state budget. The state budget put an awful lot in for, excuse me, for energy. $10 million for community scale renewable energy programs, 1.5 for community action agencies. My daughter works for a CAP agency, and I would love to see this in Massachusetts, where they're sending people out to do financial and clean energy coaching to assist low and moderate income housing. That's part of their EJ effort. Do we have another slide? And yes, state budget weatherization, $18 million. I won't list all of that. I know that Efficiency Vermont was a real winner in the budget and in some of these bills in that I know they got $4 million out of the weatherization. So there's the energy efficiency is sprinkled throughout the budget. The weatherization is also to different groups. And then finally, workforce development was made out pretty well. Again, looking at training people and retraining people for the kinds of jobs that they're going to create by all of the other things that they've put into this, that they put into these bills this year. I didn't mention that the state transportation was House 433. I should mention that. And then next slide. For the rest of this year, there are a ton of work sessions and DPU, and they have the Department of Public Services up there. Both of them are holding work sessions to try to roll out regulations and rules governing everything that they've done over the past year. So let me just mention that the Rev 2021 conference is October 4th and 5th. It is always a great conference. If you get a chance, sign up for it, and we will see you there. And I will turn this back to Jeremy.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Dan, for pinch hitting for Vermont, and no shortage of activity up there, and do commend the conference in October. And now I want to turn it back to our friend Noah Shaw to talk about what's happening in New York and how it's progressing with the promises of its big climate bill from a couple of years ago.
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. So New York, and there's one note on this slide that I'll get to that for a fix as we get there. But in New York, before we get into the specific bills, you know, as some of you may know, and I do see some friends in the attendee list, so some of you may know that there's a lot that happens in New York, but in general, on the sort of granular side of funding for particular programs and particular regulatory and tariff determinations, less of it happens in the legislative session and more of it happens at the Public Service Commission, in NYSERDA, programmatic design, et cetera. And that I think there was a bit of a swing over the course of the last couple of years, as Jeremy mentioned, with the community leadership and Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act back in 2019 that set the big goals of 100% clean energy by 2040, 70% renewable energy by 2030, and an 85% greenhouse gas reduction below 1990 levels by 2050. And then the Accelerated Energy Growth and Community Benefit Act, which has the worst acronym I can think of in our space. I can't even say it. Last year, that made great strides in terms of siting and permitting of large-scale projects and really reformed the entire way the state addresses that, and also kicked off a number of proceedings at the Public Service Commission to improve transmission policy planning and really move the state towards its goals of getting all of its green electrons upstate, where about 90% of the mix is clean, to downstate, where about 90% of the mix is dirty. So a lot going on, not a lot of it happening in the legislature this session. The New York State session runs from January through June. And so what happened this session that is worth noting, and there were obviously a lot of bills up on the draft board, but I'm just highlighting a few here. One is sort of a long standing piece of advocacy by the solar industry with respect to cross-utility crediting. That, as a lot of you may know, enables subscribers in one utility service territory to subscribe to a community solar project in a different utility service territory. In New York State, clearly the emphasis is on the ability of subscribers down in New York City in the Con Edison territory to be able to subscribe to projects that are upstate, where there's a lot more land and roofs, and the costs of developing are significantly less. We'll see where that goes in New York once the legislative session finishes up in June. There's a process where the bills sort of sit on everybody's desks for a while. Eventually, after even further discussions, they're quote unquote delivered to the governor, and then the governor may sign them, may veto them. So the conversations kind of continue in between the sessions. Sometimes there are what's called chapter amendments, so tweaks to the bills. Sometimes there are agreements to pass them in some sort of amended fashion when the legislature comes back into session in January. We'll see what happens with this particular bill. It was obviously passed by both houses. The utilities hate it. I think there are some concerns with respect to just the mechanics of how the crediting and sort of money would flow, et cetera. The next one is property tax guidance. This is, as anybody who is trying to develop a renewable energy project in New York knows, or acquire one or finance one, has been a real sort of stick in the clog in the works, something like that, with respect to understanding what the costs of a particular project in a particular taxing jurisdiction might be, or because in New York, you've got multiple taxing jurisdictions. You've got the school district, which is usually the largest percentage. You've got the county, you've got the town. There's also an option to finance through industrial development agencies. And a lot of those taxing jurisdictions, depending on what their needs are, depending on what their attitudes towards the particular project or solar or wind development in general might be, or if they hate Governor Cuomo, they would frankly, take positions with respect to what the pilot payment would be in order to exert influence over the project in any number of ways or try to kill it. So it's been a big fight for a long time. And just this year, the legislature finally passed a bill that required the Department of Tax and Finance to work with NYSERDA to issue guidance regarding the methodology for assessing these projects. That guidance obviously wouldn't be binding on the local assessors, but it's a step. I will say that this particular conversation has been happening for years, and including when I was general counsel at NYSERDA. The draft guidance issued, I think, what's today, Wednesday? I think it issued on Monday of this week. So this slide is a little out of date already. From the Department of Tax and Finance, there's a 60-day comment period. I have no doubt that there will be a significant amount of engagement on that. The next one that I thought I'd highlight that actually passed, back up, thank you, is, and this is more of a sign of things to come, I think, is the embodied carbon analysis. This bill requires the Office of General Services, which is sort of the state procurement agency, for for things for the state's account, together with the Department of Transportation, to look at mechanisms and make some recommendations for how to decrease the embodied carbon in their procurements. Again, that awaits delivery to the governor. We'll see what happens. But NYSERDA in recent years, as some of you may have seen, has started to ask proposers, specifically in the offshore wind space, for descriptions of the embodied carbon in their planned projects and how to decrease that dynamic. So this is something that the industry and I think policymakers have on the radar. The impact from embodied carbon in these projects. The next bullet should actually be on the next slide. It sneaked up onto this one as a passed bill, but it was a not passed bill. So oh, you guys hear me? We lost the slides. Well, anyway, I actually have, okay.
We can hear you now.
Should I wait for the slides to come back up? Okay. Should I wait for the slides to come back up, or you want me to keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. So the bills that didn't pass, the most notable one is probably the one that I just noted had moved up into the, here we go. The bills that didn't pass, I'll take the ones that are on the screen. So there's a tier 2 resource compensation issue in New York, and what tier 2 is within the New York State Clean Energy Standard, passed instituted by the Commission initially back in 2016. Again, without legislative authorization or the need for further sort of showing that New York does things without the legislature. There are multiple sort of tiers of resources. Tier 2 is sort of baseline resources, what I'll call baseline resources. So renewable resources, mostly hydro and wind, that were in commercial operation prior to January 1st of 2015. And there has been a long-running debate, as some of you in the attendee list are painfully aware, with respect to the compensation mechanic for tier 2 resources. Currently, NYSERDA and the Public Service Commission sort of have a combination of mechanics for this, for how to pay for these resources or how to compensate these resources for their renewable energy credits. The industry doesn't like either of them. One's a competitive process that the first stab at which was earlier this year and resulted in awards that I think most people were not satisfied with, and the other involves sort of opening up the books and taking what the Commission thinks each project deserves. This bill would have set a maximum price of 75% of the most recent Tier 1 auction, and sort of extended the program and provided a more headroom for it than is currently available. I expect that did not pass. I expect it'll come back around next year. Energy efficiency also did not pass. There have been sort of a combination of bills looking at energy efficiency that have been circulating in New York for a number of years. Codes, appliance and efficiency standards related to real estate listings, a whole sort of panoply of market signals and regulatory reforms through legislation. Again, that did not make it through the gauntlet in the legislative session this year. The next up that didn't pass that's significant is the clean or low carbon fuel standard. This has been a sort of high priority of the New York League of Conservation Voters and other environmental advocates who are focused in the transportation space for a number of years, and it hasn't passed. What I'll say about the bills that didn't pass, and just in general, is the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, set a course in its legislation and created something called the Climate Action Council, which some of you may be aware of. The Climate Action Council is in the midst of a long process of scoping the pathways, if you will, to 85% greenhouse gas reduction by 50 and its other sort of sub goals of the statute. And a lot of the reactions to bills that are coming up in the meantime is, let's wait for the Climate Action Council to come up with its recommendations so that we can have a sort of concerted policy. That draft scoping plan is due from the council at the end of this year. Next year will be basically a big long public comment session on that draft scoping plan. And we don't expect to see regulatory proceedings from the Department of Environmental Conservation, Public Service Commission, and others to actually implement that scoping plan until, you know, probably 2020. I'm losing track of years, but probably not until 2023. Next slide. All right, so what do we expect next year? Like I said, continued attention on the Climate Action Council proceedings to guide legislative priorities and timing. So to the extent folks are interested in what's going on in New York, honestly, it's good to look at what's happening in the legislature. It's good to pay attention to the Public Service Commission dockets. But the long view is really what's happening at the CAC. I think that there will be a continued emphasis from environmental and EJ groups on the CCIA. That's the Climate Community Investment Act, which we didn't get to because it was on a long slide, but that's basically a bill that did not pass that is being pushed by some of the sort of, environmental and environmental justice groups to institute what amounts to a carbon tax, $55 per ton on greenhouse gases charged upstream, and distribute that money to a combination of community-based organizations who would be doing the work of implementing programs and the renewable energy programs themselves. The carbon tax question in the New York ISO and New York State is, my view is it's not really moving forward, either at the federal sort of wholesale NECEC level or at the state level, but I'm sure it'll continue to be advocated for strongly. I don't think the tier 2 folks are going anywhere in terms of their efforts to create better compensation for those baseline resources and try to, appealing to the state's desire to keep those baseline resources, selling their RECs in New York towards its goals, as opposed to selling them outside of New York where the compensation might be better. They'll come back around on energy efficiency legislation. That was a governor's bill. There will no doubt be continued conversations about a low carbon fuel standard in keeping with the CAC transportation advisory group guidance and recommendations. On the negative side, I would expect that some of the backlash from upstate communities around quote unquote home rule related to the state's new what we call 94C, which is just a reference to the executive law provision, statewide siting process of large-scale projects. Some of the local communities who have recently brought a lawsuit against the promulgation of regulations by that office to institute the new statewide siting process. I have no doubt that they will move over to the legislature as their next forum to try to shut down the permitting of large-scale projects at the state level. So that's New York. The last thing I'll say about New York is, it's a fluid place politically right now, for all the reasons that you all are, I'm sure, aware of and getting, news alerts about on your phone. So how this all plays out over the course of the next 6, 9, 12 months is really, well, to be determined, shall we say.
Uncharted territory for sure, Noah, and thank you very much for the fast recap. We're going to pay attention to both the policy and the politics closely over the next several weeks, days, if not weeks. Now I want to shift the conversation to energy storage, and we've seen a lot of our priority storage bills pass in our region. In addition, there's plenty of energy storage activity going on in states that have already set ambitious targets. And I want to invite our star intern and soon-to-be Tufts senior, Ella Park, to set the stage for this conversation. And then we'll have a back and forth with all the panelists around where states are seeing common themes and where the work needs to be done to really make storage a key element to the clean energy transition. Ella.
Thank you for that gracious introduction, Jeremy, and thank you all for listening with me today. Most of you have probably seen me on calls or email chains, but for those of you who haven't, again, I'm Ella, and I have had the pleasure of being the NECEC policy intern this summer. So as Jeremy mentioned, I'm going to kick off our panel discussion on energy storage by doing a brief overview of some of the similarities and some overlapping themes amongst energy storage efforts in the great states of Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, and New York. And if you could go to the next slide, please. So as you're all aware, this session has seen a very fair amount of progress in the energy storage sector and has continued to build upon the successes of previous years. And although each state has differing and varying energy storage goals, they all, I think, hammer some overlapping themes that I've kind of extracted as having bold and ambitious targets, emphasizing the importance of renewable backups and the opportunities for behind and in front of the meter systems. And I think these themes all lie under, I want to say, the umbrella of the crucial energy storage roadmap, and is the only way that we're going to move forward with concrete progress. So Public Act 2153 in Connecticut and LD 528 in Maine, which are both advancements in storage, have I think set prominent examples this session and really emphasize the themes that I've mentioned on this slide, and programs in Massachusetts that I don't have concretely written on this slide, but such programs such as Clean Peak, Smart Connected Solutions have also moved us in the right direction with long-term sustainable programs, as well as New York's energy storage roadmap. And next slide now, please. Yeah, so if advancing energy storage is critical to our goals for the clean energy transition, I think some main questions we have to ask are we headed in the right direction, and where is the future of energy storage going? So in my opinion, I think the main challenges to overcome are first the common misconceptions about the cost, safety, and commercial availability of storage technologies. And I think that we need to educate customers, businesses, particularly about energy storage, so we can, I guess, quote unquote, bust these myths. And I know as an intern coming in to NECEC, I had no idea what energy storage was. Even as an environmental policy major, I had no idea. So with that being said, I think the future of energy storage is definitely super promising, and we need the Northeast states to come together with, I think, even more common themes. And they have concrete goals that are moving us forward. But I think an important and overlooked factor from my perspective as a rising senior in college is I think it's important to educate younger people like me, as well as customers and businesses, to better understand energy storage and give them a chance to become excited and informed about the steps that need to happen in order for us to achieve our very ambitious but exciting goals for energy storage. So with that, thank you all for your time, and I will pass it back to Jeremy to continue our discussion.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Ella, for setting the table. And I want to invite all of our panelists to turn their cameras on and to participate in the conversation. And I guess the first question, I'm going to turn it to Noah first to ask about sort of New York, and they have the sort of bold CLCPA storage target. And yet that target's not going to get things built. What's the sort of special sort of pathway between the target and creating markets for energy storage and the types of energy storage applications that New York wants to see? I'm not sure if others can hear you, Noah, but I can't.
Sorry, I have double mute going on there. It's a great question, and there are a lot of people who have a lot of strong feelings about tariff design and related matters that have significant impacts for energy storage, as distinct, obviously, from solar or related resources. You know, we are now into the second round of bulk storage RFPs from the utilities, kicked off as a result of the actually the pre-CLCPA December 2018 order from the Public Service Commission that set the 1.5 gigawatt goal. So the energy storage goal in New York actually is older than most of the other CLCPA goals, and the state has had a little bit more time to try to, put the pieces in place from a procurement and tariff design point of view. One of the interesting things about New York is that the markets are so unbelievably different as between New York City and the rest of the state. You're really talking about two completely different sets of market signals, cost structures, resource availability. And so when I talk to clients who are trying to develop, 5 megawatt storage projects in the mesh network in Brooklyn, the set of issues is utterly and completely different than it would be for somebody trying to do, a storage project that's paired with solar in some field in the North Country. And so I think the challenge for New York really is to get specific about the tariff designs for those different kinds of energy storage resources. In particular, where down in the city, where the need is so great and the potential for the revenue is so high because of the need for flexibility in those congested areas, the prices in the wholesale markets, which are higher for the time being. So demand rates need to be reformed. The alternative cost of service proceeding needs to finish up at the Public Service Commission. There are values within the VETR tariff, the DRV and LSRV, which are important to storage, that are updates to which are sort of sitting in a marginal cost of service proceeding that hasn't gone anywhere for a little while. The state needs to pick up those batons, move them forward, and try to bring the structure of energy storage tariff design sort of up to speed with what its goals are. What I'll also say is there's a lot of opportunity related to the electric vehicle market and storage resources, whether those storage resources are built into the charging stations themselves or paired with the charging stations. My experience, and I'm sure all of yours is that the private sector is always going to be more creative and innovative than government is able to anticipate. And so we're seeing a lot of configurations out there that utilities and the regulators just need to be able to react to quickly and enable if we want to meet our goals. So sort of a long answer, sorry about that. There's a lot to say here, and a lot of it is it's related to really keeping those proceedings and the alternative cost of service and marginal cost of service dockets moving along and moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I worry about is, you have these storage is a broad term under which a lot of applications fall. And there are a lot of different programs that are confusing and internally contradictory. And so maybe the question to the whole panel is, so how do we marry that up? How do we make sure that we're not building a farmhouse that has too many wings that are going to collide with each other and really not get to our goal? And maybe Marty, I'll turn it to you first, because you're sort of Maine is a little bit sort of closer to the beginning of their storage pathway, and then Dan, I'll ask you to hop in.
Yeah, really briefly, an update from Maine is that in the previous legislature, we convened a storage commission. A lot of people think that did good work. And then it was, unfortunately, with the COVID shutdown in March 2020, that work was all lost. So the legislation actually did return in this session. It passed under LD 528, which I'll put in the chat, the link. Or in the Q&A panel. And the big thing is it was 100 megawatts when proposed and 300 megawatts when passed. And so I think there's a lot of support. There's also a power to fuel pilot program. There's a critical care up to 15 megawatts storage and so forth. So one of the few
point for me, right? That there are a lot of different programs for a lot of different applications, and I, how to create the market forces to make it work is a challenge. Sorry to interrupt you, Marty.
No, that's exactly right. And even within there, the GEO is asked to do a market assessment. So tons of cross the aisle support for this work.
Dan, I want to ask you the same question.
Yeah, I mean, well, number one, people think we didn't have storage years ago. As a matter of fact, when we wrote the electric restructuring law in 1997, we said you can't do that. You can't store. You have to generate power 24/7. The fact of the matter is, I worked on the Bear Swamp project when I was in college, which is about 47 years ago. That was a pump storage plant. So there are storages that we've had for a while. I think what's important is, and I go back to Vermont. Vermont is defining what storage is, and it's anything that holds and discharges power. And so I think that once you get that basic outline, then you have to figure out how you apply it. In some places, it's grid scale. In some places, they're just evening out their power flow. In a place that I saw in Maine, Marty, they were just charging and discharging by the millisecond. So I think it's any place that you can use this. In Vermont, they're using batteries, Tesla batteries, in houses, and they're using grid scale storage where they can't. So I think it has to be defined. And then I think as we go forward, really it goes down to grid modernization. How do we do grid mod so that all of this can integrate in? It has the same issues as solar does, as offshore wind does. So once we figure out what the new grid's going to look like, you can plug in, regardless of what it is, you can plug that storage in. I think storage has to supplement whatever else you're doing. There's very few standalones, but I think that you integrate it into whatever the grid is going to look like in the future.
Anybody else want to weigh in on the sort of challenge of too many moving parts or a lot of moving parts to try to achieve a lot of different goals with storage? I got a next question if nobody wants to take the bait on that one. And this one's for Mike and Sean about, you've got this new storage bill that just passed in Connecticut. You've got this new program that Pura just sort of finalized. How are those two going to marry up, and how optimistic are you for the future of storage in Connecticut?
Yeah, well, Jeremy, I'll start with that. I think every session there seems to be a top priority. Some would call it, a shiny new toy. And a couple of years ago, it was offshore wind. This year, it was clearly energy storage. And what the legislature proposed was a total of 1,000 megawatts with pretty significant interim goals. What Pura ultimately decided on was roughly 60% of the legislature's goals, half of which go into residential, half to CNI and firm meter. And I think there's a sincere effort in Connecticut to move forward with storage. I think they realize that this is if we're going to achieve the governor's renewable energy goals, storage is a must. And how we get there, I think it's still uncharted waters. So, Sean, Phil, in from there.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that we think the Connecticut program has the potential to really be successful and drive energy storage development and innovation in Connecticut, and have already cited to it the decision in other states. And I think it actually goes back to Jeremy's question previously as well about consolidating programs. This is a 580 megawatt program by 2030 that includes all of the components that Marty outlined in the Maine legislation, all under one program. So it kind of gets it all. It incentivizes the different types of development differently within this one program, and also will have a front of the meter component developed in the next year or so. It's an exciting program that I think does kind of house a lot of Connecticut storage priorities under one roof, which makes it easier for participants. So that's what I'll add to what Mike had.
And maybe Sam, like what do you see as the aspirations for a state like New Hampshire, which has a different sort of political outlook and a different sort of legislative process and a division of Department of Energy that's sort of in formation?
Yeah, in terms of how to see the division, the new Department of Energy and how that will play out with regards to how they interact with the public and the PUC, to be determined. Again, we are hopeful. We supported the separation that occurred, and our hope is that we will be able to sort of ask what, for policies to be explained and disclosed more publicly than has been in the past. PUC staff essentially refused to talk to anybody, citing ex parte rules, and so we're now hopeful that we'll be able to just talk to those folks and ask them about their thinking. So that's the hope. As the chaos this summer has meant that it's, to be determined. I'd say that in New Hampshire, really the guiding star in terms of threading the political needle is talking about our socialized costs to the ISO New England tariff. And so when you look at the law that was passed and its language regarding the creation of storage rules, it's really all about avoiding actual T&D, transmission and distribution charges, and making sure that the savings for avoiding those charges will be passed on to customers, and creating price signals that encourage a program design that will reduce those regional costs. And so that's really the sweet spot for us, I think, in terms of pitching this to the lawmakers that we're talking to, essentially. And I think that's kind of a sweet spot for storage, because you can design a program that essentially is like a clean peak program, but you're making the argument on a cost basis as opposed to an emissions basis.
All right, I know we're sort of running out of time, folks, and we're going to go a little bit over. I have a question for everybody. I'm going to go down the line. What is in 3 to 5 years time, what are the 4 words that are going to define energy storage for the region? And we're going to end with Ella, because she's going to get the last word, but I'm just going to go down my screen and ask the 4 words or fewer that are going to define energy storage in the clean energy transition in the Northeast. Dan Bosley.
1 word: ubiquitous. It'll be everywhere.
Sean Burke. Muted.
That was to give myself some more time to think of 4 words. I'm gonna try it. All right. Integrating renewables, long and short.
And
we're gonna count and as not.
Noah Shaw.
I guess variable. I don't mean that in terms of power flow. What I mean is, to Dan's point, it's going to be everything from Tesla batteries to large pumped hydro, and it's going to serve all kinds of different purposes, and the policy making around it is going to be a challenge. But I think it's going to hit every little piece of the system in different ways.
It's a fluid definition of 4 words, Noah. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, well, I only had 1 word. My 1 word needed a lot of explanation.
Marty G.
I note good comments in the chat from Kelsey Fiore and Ken Nelson, and I would say addressing peaks and widely supported.
Mike.
6 words, not 4, bringing renewables to the next level.
Nice. Sam Evans Brown.
I'd say largely behind the meter, at least here in New Hampshire. I think that's where it'll happen.
I'm gonna take the moderator's prerogative before I turn it to Ella and say, enabling 24/7. And in response to Ken's note in the chat, and I think that's going to be a piece. Ella, last word. 4 words for energy storage.
I'm going to say that we still have a lot of work to do, so it's 5, but best is yet to come.
Terrific. Well, listen, guys, thank you very much, Ella, for teeing us up, and thank you for humoring me in my ridiculous questions. I want to turn it back over to Peter, but really thank the partners and everybody for joining us this morning. It has been a great conversation, and totally unfair to ask all of us to try to pack in 7 legislative sessions and an energy storage discussion into a 90-minute session. But you guys were up to the task. So thank you so much from the whole team at NECEC. And Peter, take it away.
Thank you, Jeremy, and everybody. On page right, go back to the slide. There it is. Thank you. 2 events to highlight here.
You're a little muffled, Peter.
The first one is part of our 3-part series, Connecting Regions on the Road to COP26, focusing on decarbonizing transportation. That's on September 14th. And then our Green Tie Gala is coming back this year. That's November 18th. Hold that date. More details are forthcoming. And if I could have the last page here, Kate, I wanted to, for this wrap up, just to say thanks to so many folks and people. We couldn't do this work without your collaboration and support. That starts with all of our state partners, the Renewable Energy Vermont, Focus Government Affairs, E2Tech, Clean Energy New Hampshire. Also our sponsor, Foley Hoag, great work, and thank you, NOAA, for your collaboration and support today. Also, thank you to Kate Johnson and the team at Fields Associates who support all of our event activities. And then to our NECEC policy team, thank you, Jeremy, for your leadership and bringing everyone together today. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Ella. Great job setting up the energy storage discussion. And finally, last but not least, thank you to all of our members. We can only do our policy work because you bring issues to us, you weigh in with us, we amplify each other's voices, we bring a shared vision of how the clean energy economy is going to transition. And we need to keep that up because it's just getting more complex and going faster than ever. So thank you all very much. Let's keep up the good collaboration and great work. I think that's a wrap for today.